historical theology at Fordham, which is where we became friends. And her master's in systematic theology with Roger Haight at Union Theological in New York. Lisa is also a musician and music educator. She has served on the music faculties of Long Island University, Nyack College, the Diller Quayle School of Music, and others. And many others. She is currently the co-founder and co-director of the Community Voices Choir, a creative aging initiative at Lincoln Center.
Nice.
Let's welcome Lisa.
Thank you very much for your warm welcome. It's a pleasure to be here. It's really an honor to be here. And I say this specifically this current semester because I've had the privilege of teaching history of the Catholic worker to my students in my religion and social justice course, of which one of my students, Taha, is here from Manhattan University, excuse me. And I'm gazing back, I think, is that Mother Cabrini I see looking at me from back there? We had a marvelous visit to her shrine as part of our coursework this semester, and that was really great. I feel a little bit small. Should I sit on the table?
You're welcome.
Would that be maybe, or yes?
Sure, you can.
Is it
Yeah,
easier?
you can. Yeah.
Is it able to support me?
Did everybody get one of those? Yeah.
It will definitely hold your weight. Don't worry about that.
Joanne, are you
I'm a
recording?
little-
Okay.
If you want to hold on to this, Jim. This might be- Yes.
Yeah,
That's easier, right? I can see you all.
Yeah.
You can tell once you can take the gal out of showbiz, but you can't take the showbiz out of the gal. And it's fun to be here. I was one of my other students. I had chosen to do the Dorothy Day Pilgrimage Walk just in the last couple of weeks, and had written in their reflection paper that Dorothy was so happy to move into this space because it was a former music school, and was so pleased. I learned all this from my student, as one does, and was so pleased that the residence rooms were former practice rooms because the walls were filled with music. So that was a really interesting bit of historical knowledge I didn't know, but was very pleasing to me as I made my way down here. But tonight I'm going to talk to you about Paris. Paris in the 20th century. First, I want to ask, can you all hear me in the back? Okay, great. Thank you. We're going to talk about Paris in the 20th century and about a particular figure, Simone Weil, who has been a very close intellectual and spiritual companion for me since I first discovered her writings 20 years ago, I guess. So we will be partly historical, partly philosophical and theological, and I'll be sharing with you some moments of her writing, of which you have some excerpts on the paper there, because I really find it difficult to talk about Simone Weil without giving folks a taste of the flavor and cadence and poetry of her own thought. So here we go. And the object of all of this is to try to tie together different themes that all will build upon one another to help us understand what I meant when I said the title of this talk would be Simone Weil and Making Room for the Other. And I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts after we go through this somewhat labyrinthine journey. Paris in the years between the two world wars of the 20th century was a tumultuous mix of intransigent, patriotic, anti-democratic reactionaries on one extreme, and liberal, secular, even anti-Christian, and certainly anti-clerical Republicans on the other, as well as a proliferation of, quote, third way options, trying to forge a path through a highly politicized and polarized climate. France in the interwar period, from the jazz age of the 20s to the increasing international hostilities of the 1930s, was a nation beset with contested values, rising xenophobia and anti-Semitism, economic depression and even collapse, multiple truth claims clamoring for allegiance and a proliferation of propaganda found not only in the media of the time, pamphlets and speeches, but also leaching into the highest forms of arts and culture. Sound a little familiar? 20th century French philosopher Simone Weil, who was born in 1909 and died in 1943 at 34 years of age. She was not insensitive to the pressures of her time, welcome, nor to the suffering she witnessed around her. She pushed her philosophy and her life against the political, social, and economic forces that pressed against her and brought so much suffering. At the same time, she explored the unquenchable human desire for God, expressed in a longing to merge her human will with the will of the infinite divine. Highlights of her life story are well known: her brilliant intellect, social activism, her nickname of the Red Virgin, although she never joined the Communist Party, her self-elected employment as a factory worker, her attempt to fight Franco in the Spanish Civil War, tenure as a farm laborer in occupied France, her migraines, her mystical experiences, peculiar eating and non-eating habits, and so it goes on and on. Her spiritual embrace of Christianity, which stopped just shy of official baptism, leaving her waiting, and hypomene, as she put it in her beloved Greek, on the steps of the church she adored. Weil writes in an aphoristic, provocative, really kind of amazing style. Because her writing is so distinctive, in the handout are a few of her passages that will be a part of my presentation. So when I come to those moments, I'll call out the bold-faced letter, and you can locate yourself on the handout if you want to read along. I'm going to speak this evening on a few key themes present in Weil's thought: truth, attention, necessity, decreation, creation, affliction, God, and what it means to truly see and receive our neighbor, which involves, for Weil, the decreating of ourselves to make room for the other. Discerning the truth with a capital T is no small matter. Part of the difficulty, Weil believes, is that we do not realize that truth exists on a different plane than that of our ordinary world. For Weil, truth is an absolute. It's a good of a supernatural order. It's eternal. It's light. Yet this light breaks through to meet us here in created reality, and in so doing changes us. Changes our world, changes our perception, and gives us contact with truth, with real reality in this world of necessity and objects. Truth for Weil is the light, the supernatural light, illuminating the world of necessity, giving us direct contact with a piece of reality. Now I'm going to tell you that Weil believes we are liars. We lie to each other and we lie to ourselves. We spend the minutes, hours, and days of our lives occupied with tasks and pursuits that are shrouded in dreams, dreams that mist over our true limits and mask that edge of authentic contact with reality. Like the beings in the allegory of the cave, written by her beloved Plato, we exist interacting with shadows that we believe are real. Our entire frame of reference is distorted. We are subject to this distortion and deceive and content ourselves with the acceptance that this distortion is reality. In our subjection to Plato's cave, which Weil insists is not in our civilizational past, but is ongoing and right now, we are incapable of any true thought or act. Quote, we are offered nothing but lies, end quote. We convince ourselves that the good we possess in our family and friends, wealth, power, and love are the value of our existence and the means of satisfying our desires, and that with just a little bit more of them, we will know fulfillment and truth. But our desires are never fully satisfied. We delude ourselves into thinking the future will provide us with an all-sufficient good, when the future, in fact, is made of no different stuff than the present. If we're honest with ourselves, we will, quote, realize that there is nothing in this world to live for. We have only to imagine all our desires satisfied, After a time, we should be discontented. We should want something else, and we should be miserable through not knowing what to want, end quote. To be honest with ourselves, however, we do have to know ourselves. And even this we cannot do, for in the cave all we see is our own shadow. The Delphic know thyself is not possible nor practicable in the cave. What is necessary, Weil believes, is that we develop our capacity for attention. To do this, one both exerts an effort of will and also disposes of the will in order to empty, wait, and allow. In actuality, the human will gets distilled into one minuscule exercise of freedom, the freedom to consent to decreate. So before describing this consent to decreate in more detail, I'm going to back up and set up a little bit of how Weil gets to this idea. It's important that in understanding a thinker like Weil, especially someone like her, because she integrated her philosophy and action in her life so fully. Weil's graduating thesis at the École Normale in 1930 framed the famous cogito of Descartes, I think, therefore I am, into her own. I can act, therefore I am. She wrote, quote, to exist, to think, to know are only aspects of a single reality to be able to act. What I am is defined by what I can do, end quote. She put her thesis to test following her graduation. She grew more involved with the workers' movement, with teachers, miners, and factory workers. At the same time, the rise of nationalism and fascism in Italy and Germany, with strong echoes in France, agonized her. Moreover, the great suffering of Russia under communist rule was becoming impossible to deny. At one point, I think in 1933, she hosted Trotsky in her family apartment. They got into a big argument. She told him Russia was no longer a worker state. Trotsky said that it was, and the fight went on into the early hours of the morning. She was now convinced that collectivities, groups, could not provide the kinds of deep answers called for by the suffering endured in 20th century Europe. So by 1933, her philosophical and social thought had reached an impasse. Increasingly disillusioned by the current political and social climate, she hoped that actual contact with the life of the worker would provide her with answers that the other methods had not. She took a sabbatical from her teaching duties in 1934, and she entered the workforce voluntarily as a factory piece worker, as in P-I-E-C-E, on the assembly line, not working for, give peace a chance, but piece worker. She was physically unsuited for the demanding work. She suffered from recurring migraine headaches, and sadly found little camaraderie among her fellow laborers. Yet, this radical move to work in the factory brought Weil into face-to-face contact with an important reality, one that she would name le malheur, or affliction. In a letter to a friend in 1935, she described her experience of affliction during her factory year. This is not on your handout, so just bear with me. It's a long quote. What working in a factory meant for me personally was as follows. It meant that all the external reasons, which I had previously thought internal, upon which my sense of personal dignity, my self-respect was based, were radically destroyed within 2 or 3 weeks by the daily experience of brutal constraint. And don't imagine that this provoked in me any rebellious reaction. No, on the contrary, it produced the last thing I expected from myself, docility. The resigned docility of a beast of burden. Slowly and painfully, in and through slavery, I reconquered my sense of my human dignity, a sense which relied, this time, upon nothing outside myself, and was accompanied always by the knowledge that I possessed no right to anything, and that any moment free from humiliation and suffering should be accepted as a favor, as merely a lucky chance, end quote. This experience in the factory so marked and changed Weil that she realized her earlier understandings of human personality and will, what she felt could be shaped by the rational activity of the human mind, which is very French, In the midst of blind natural and social forces, these understandings were inadequate. She had not realized that those blind natural and social forces had the potential for utterly destroying the human soul. After 1 year in the factory, she was physically, emotionally, spiritually, and psychologically battered. And she could not imagine how someone who did not have the opportunity to leave the factory, as she did, nor her education and strength of will, might hold on to their soul. She realized it was quite possible that the human soul could be annihilated. Affliction, Weil says, is not like simple suffering, but it's a specific and irreducible kind of suffering. Affliction appropriates the soul and brands it with slavery. It is always physical suffering, but not only this. Merely physical suffering can be forgotten the moment it's over, like a toothache. But affliction is different. Affliction attacks life in its entirety, physically, psychologically, and socially. Most importantly, it's the degradation and humiliation, or the fear of degradation and humiliation, involved in the social aspect that marks a suffering condition specifically as affliction. Affliction strikes arbitrarily, by chance. No one is protected, although some are spared. Likewise, the same event may bring affliction into one person's life, but not affect another's in the same way. Affliction has the capability to reduce its victims to things, to invisibility, and to social and self-contempt. The afflicted cannot help anyone, least of all themselves. If compassion is actually found among the afflicted, Weil regards this as a miracle, more astonishing than, quote, walking on water, healing the sick, or even raising the dead, end quote. Affliction carries on one hand a power of attraction. We're drawn to affliction, rushing after its victim like animals drawn by the smell of blood, and disgusted at our species' example of weakness like hens, we peck at the victim. On the other hand, affliction reeled to us up close in, quote, all its nakedness as a corrosive force, a mutilation or leprosy of the soul, can cause us to cringe and back away. Because listening to another means being able to put oneself in another's place. Listening to the afflicted would cause a similar annihilation of self in the more fortunate. Thus the afflicted are mute and surrounded by those who are deaf. Even when the afflicted can still cry out, what they say is incoherent. The afflicted are without the ability to express themselves. The afflicted also experience a vortex of psychological and spiritual inertia. One who has suffered affliction long enough can become complicit with it. The afflicted person then doesn't try to improve their situation nor seek deliverance. Often they make the surprising response of deliberately flouting attempts at improvement and deliverance, and if relieved of their affliction, will retain something inside that desires to embrace affliction once more. This happens, Weil says, when affliction has pierced irrevocably into the depth of the soul. Once one is established in affliction, it may appear for all intents and purposes to the more fortunate that the afflicted one is actually contented. Weil finds profound examples of affliction in Scripture. Christ was afflicted. In his passion, he was in agonizing physical pain, bereft of the consolation of his friends who had deserted him, publicly humiliated by his torturers, and particularly in the ending of the Gospel of Mark that is quoted frequently by Weil, believed himself forsaken by the Father. Another biblical example is Job. Job cries out that he is innocent in such despairing accents, she writes, because he too at some level believes as his friends believe. It is because he himself, she writes, is unable to believe so. It is because his soul within him is on the side of his friends. His affliction is so great, he cries out to God, not just to spare him the affliction, but goes deeper. He cries out to God to bear witness to what he is no longer going to be able to remember or hold on to, namely his innocence. As the logic of his friends and the effect of the affliction working on the state of his soul erode away the testimony of his own conscience. Weil writes that for Job, the testimony of his conscience is, quote, no longer anything but an abstract, lifeless memory for him, end quote. Anything that departs from the model of truth about affliction revealed by Job is, according to Weil, more or less tainted by falsehood. Thus it was in this broken state, following her contact with affliction in the factory, that Weil first encountered Christianity and Christian mystical experience. After leaving the factory, Weil's parents took her on a holiday to Portugal. And this is your first letter A. Weil wrote about her year, and she said, after my year in the factory, before going back to teaching, I had been taken by my parents to Portugal, and while there, I left them to go alone to a little village. I was, as it were, in pieces, soul and body. That contact with affliction had killed my youth. Until then, I had not had any experience of affliction, unless we count my own migraines, which, as it was my own, seemed to me to have little importance, and which, moreover, was only a partial affliction, being biological and not social. I knew quite well that there was a great deal of affliction in the world. I was obsessed with the idea, but I had not had prolonged and first-hand experience of it. As I worked in the factory, indistinguishable to all eyes, including my own, from the anonymous mass, the affliction of others entered into my flesh and my soul. Nothing separated me from it, for I had really forgotten my past, and I looked forward to no future, finding it difficult to imagine the possibility of surviving all the fatigue. What I went through there marked me in so lasting a manner that still today, when any human being, whoever he may be and in whatever circumstances, speaks to me without brutality, I cannot help having the impression that there must be a mistake, and that unfortunately the mistake will in all probability disappear. There I received forever the mark of a slave, like the branding of the red-hot iron which the Romans put on the foreheads of their most despised slaves. Since then, I have always regarded myself as a slave. In this state of mind then, and in a wretched fit condition physically, I entered the little Portuguese village, which alas was very wretched too, on the very day of its patronal festival. I was alone. It was the evening, and there was a full moon. It was by the sea. The wives of the fishermen were going in processional, to make a tour of all the ships, carrying candles and singing what must certainly be very ancient hymns of a heart-rending sadness. Nothing can give any idea of it. I have never heard anything so poignant unless it were the song of the boatmen on the Volga. There, the conviction was suddenly borne in upon me that Christianity is preeminently the religion of slaves, that slaves cannot help belonging to it, and I among others. May's contact with affliction in the factory altered her confidence in the power of the human will and in the human being's capacity to act. It was with this new recognition of the power of affliction that Weil developed another of her distinctive ideas, the notion of decreation. Decreation is intimately related to creation, as well as to Weil's understanding of necessity. So let me begin with the latter two notions first. According to Genesis 1:26, human beings are made by the divine creator in the image and likeness of God. They interpreted this to mean that human beings are called to the imitation of God in the act of creation. She developed a specific interpretation of the Christian doctrine of creatio ex nihilo, creation out of nothing, that reached beyond biblical sources to draw again on the wisdom of ancient Greece, quoting the myth of creation in Plato's Timaeus. She quotes from Timaeus, "The creation of this world," this is from Timaeus, "the creation of this world took place by a combination composed partly of necessity and partly of mind, and the divine mind accomplishes its ends through the inflexible mechanism of necessity, reigning over necessity by persuasion. Necessity is good," she writes, "because it's willed by the voluntary action of God, and as such, it's a manifestation of the will of God. Necessity is what reveals the double law of matter. It's an obvious indifference, characterized by chance, arbitrariness, and limit. And at the same time, it also shares in a mysterious complicity with divine providence. Necessity is constituted by space and time. Necessity is also the beauty of the order of the world, an order that can be scientifically understood and described. In fact, she says, all of science has as its object of study the order of the world. This order gives our world its form and its limits. Necessity is also sovereign in our created world. We are ruled by necessity in our simplest actions, and necessity presents a world, she writes, so totally indifferent to our desires that we feel how very nearly nothing we are. It's important to realize that there's no escaping the pattern of necessity, and at the same time, one is to love and adore necessity as the will of God. In doing this, one orients oneself to the realm of the supernatural by contact with necessity, mediated by love and the action of divine grace. Those are a lot of abstract thoughts all in a row.
It's very abstract.
Yes,
This whole thing is very abstract.
it's pretty abstract. I'm going to try to go a little slower.
Yeah, I wish there were more examples.
Yeah, but there'll be more as we go along. There, yeah, I'll share some more of those. She is saying that necessity, the order of the world, runs by chance. We're subject to it. Can't really find a rhyme or reason. Why does affliction affect one person and not somebody else? And at the same time, necessity is the realm by which we experience many wonderful things. The beauty of the order of the world. So there's some sustaining of necessity by this mysterious complicity with divine providence.
I mean, necessity of having to go to work.
That's a part of it, but the necessity of the sun rising and setting, the necessity of matter, meaning that anything that's created and not supernatural is part of the world of necessity. Only something
Part of the world. I don't
part of
understand
the
why
world.
it's part of the necessity.
I think
Like,
that
when you need to do
Yeah.
something,
because what she's doing, I'll take one little digression. What she's doing is she's looking at Christian sources, and she's looking at ancient Greek sources and reading them with a Christian eye. And in those sources, the word necessity is quite important. So that's why she's linking that with the matter of the world. It's a great point. Let me look at a concrete example. Here's your concrete example. Let's see if this helps. Weil uses to illustrate necessity and divine grace with these two concepts, gravity and solar energy. On Earth, the law of gravity reigns, right? Including over the human soul. Weil writes, and this is B on your handout. Weil writes that the only power that can overcome gravity is solar energy. It is because this energy comes down to earth and is received by plants that they are able to grow vertically upwards. It enters into animals and men through the act of eating, and it is only thanks to this that we are able to hold ourselves erect and lift things up. Every source of mechanical energy, water, power, coal, and very probably petroleum, derives in the same way from it. So it is the sun that drives our motors and lifts our airplanes, as it also lifts the birds. We cannot go and fetch this solar energy. We can only receive it. The energy comes down. It enters into plants and is with the seed buried underground in darkness. It is there that its fertility becomes most active, inciting the movement from below upwards, which makes the wheat or the tree grow. It is the image of grace, which comes down to be buried in the darkness of our evil souls and is the only source of energy which can counteract the trend towards evil, which is the moral law of gravity. We cannot actively seek the solar energy. We cannot grab it. We cannot make use of it. But we can arrange ourselves in such a way so as to best receive it, like the farmer who organizes his field so that his plants have optimal growing conditions. We can dispose of ourselves to, quote, receive grace, and it is grace which supplies the energy needed for this effort, end quote. The supernatural part of the human soul, the infinitesimally small part, is where God, solar energy, comes to meet us. By being rooted above, we turn our souls like the faces of sunflowers towards solar energy and rise against gravity. Vey pushes the solar energy metaphor still further. Not only are we unable to access the source of solar energy on our own, but we also cannot access the power which transforms that energy into food. The kenotic, which means the self-emptying, life-giving and sustaining power of the soul of the world is illustrated in this metaphor. Just as the sun is the image of God, so the vegetable sap, which can use the solar energy and which makes plants and trees rise up straight in defiance of gravity, and which offers itself to be crushed and destroyed inside us when we eat, and so to maintain our life, is the image of the Son, S-O-N, the mediator. And she's going to get there through some Greek, so stay with me. Stay with me.
She got all this from like working in a factory for a few
No, because she got this because she translated all of the ancient texts of Greek herself, all of Plato, and translated the Bhagavad Gita from Sanskrit twice in a life that only lasted 34 years. She was one of
soaking
those.
up solar energy.
She was soaking up solar energy all into her brain, right? And then in one last twist on the solar metaphor, Vey frequently reminds herself and whoever might be reading her notes that the Gospel of Matthew teaches us that God sends the sun and the rain, in other words, grace and blessings, to the just and the unjust alike. Something to think about. But if necessity is reality created by God, how did this creation come about? According to Vey, God withdrew God's self in order for the world to come into being. This she is drawing from Timaeus, Plato. In Timaeus, the creation myth there talks of the composer God who composed creation and desired the creation to be as much as possible like himself. According to Plato, the world was a spiritual being. And as a spiritual being, it was a living being that had a soul. The world has a soul. For Plato, and here's where the Greek comes in, the soul of the world was referred to as monogenes, the Son of God, S-O-N. The same Greek word, notes Vey, used in the fourth gospel. In John's gospel, the glory of the logos, of the word, in the beginning was the word and the word was with God, the Greek is logos. The glory of the logos is described as that of monogenes, a father's only son. In her Christian reading of the Timaeus, Vey equates Plato's soul of the world with the unique Son of God, the mediator, who is Christ. Her favorite translation of the Greek word logos, which if you look in the Liddell Scott dictionary, has pages of semantic range, lots and lots of options. Her favorite one is mediation. For her, logos is mediation between the supernatural and the creative. In the Timaeus, the creator placed the soul of the world, and now I'm going to try to illustrate this, but there are scholars that can do this much better than I can, but like antiquity people. In the Timaeus, the creator placed the soul of the world in the center of a circle in a circular heaven, quote, unique, solitary, capable by its own virtue of being its own companion, having need of nothing other than itself, known and loved sufficiently by itself. In this manner, the soul of the word begets this happy God, the world. The creator God then splits the composition in two along the length and crosses the parts over in an X. Then he joins them and sets them in motion in some kind of endless circular motion, which I can't really do well with my hands, but that's what they describe. What's interesting for Simone Weil is she says it's an X, like the cross, an oblique kind of cross, but one nonetheless. She says And in this, she believes that in this creation of the soul, by the soul of the world, we see, and let me just read it. She says she believes God is in voluntary cleavage, torn apart in creation. It is this involvement, she writes, with space and time which constitutes this cleavage, which is already a sort of passion. St. John also, in the Apocalypse, in the book of Revelation, speaks of the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world. The two halves of the soul of the world are crossed, one upon the other. The cross is oblique, but all the same, it's a sort of cross. But opposite to that crossing point, the two halves are joined, and the whole is enveloped in a circular movement, a movement which changes nothing, which curls in upon itself the perfect image of the eternal and blessed act, which is the life of the Trinity. This tearing apart demonstrates for Weil that creation then was not an expansion or an emanation on the part of God, as many people have postulated, but rather was the Trinitarian God's loving, voluntary act of abdication by withdrawal. Moreover, the creation of the world had Christological dimensions, as you just heard, and these point to the spiritual nature of the human being. And also, one recognizes, she believes, the sense of God's powerlessness in a contemporary world fraught with violence and evil. And this, she has Christ's passion as her example. They wrote, this is C on your handout. Because he is the creator, God is not all-powerful. Creation is abdication. But he is all-powerful in this sense, that his abdication is voluntary. He knows its effects and wills them. He has abandoned the whole of our being, except for that part of our soul which dwells like him in the heavens. Christ himself did not know this truth until he was on the cross. The power of God here below, compared to that of the prince of this world, is something infinitely small. God has abandoned God. God has emptied himself. This means that both the creation and the incarnation are included with the passion. A lot of these folks around this time in 20th century Europe are playing with these same kinds of ideas. They may sound strange today, but this was a lot in the mix. It's a radically kenotic, a radically self-emptying understanding of creation. God empties God's self in creation in voluntary abdication, withdrawing except for that part of our soul which dwells with God, that infinitely small, uncreated part of our soul. They regard the human soul, except for that one little bitty part, as created matter. And as matter, it's subject to necessity like everything else, and the laws of the world, including destruction and death. But necessity can be regarded from 2 points of view. That of the created, which sees necessity, or let's just say reality, as the blind and arbitrary forces that cause human beings pain, suffering, and affliction. And it can also be viewed from the perspective of the supernatural, which sees reality, necessity, as the goodness of the providence of God manifested in the beauty of the order of the world. So she says, if human beings change their perspective and try to regard necessity from the point of view of the supernatural, using their imaginations, their contemplative practice, whatever it is to get there, they would see that the face of necessity, the face of reality, that is turned to God in obedience. So what seems to us as blind and arbitrary, from the other side, looks as perfect obedience. They wrote, what seemed to be necessity becomes obedience. Matter is entirely passive, and in consequence entirely obedient to God's will. It's a perfect model for us. What is more beautiful than the effect of gravity on sea waves as they flow in ever-changing folds, or the almost eternal folds of the mountains? Decreation affords human beings the path to participate in viewing necessity from God's perspective, and in doing so to fall into accord with obedience to the will of God. For Weil, decreation was the spiritual process imitating God's act of abdication in creation. We can only decreate what belongs to us. But most of what we think of as us, our possessions, status, bodies, even our souls, don't actually belong to us. For they are all subject to chance and necessity and vulnerable to being destroyed with or without our consent. So what then is left of us that we can consent to decreate? Weil writes that the only thing we truly possess in this world is the power to say I. And this is what we have to give to God. Our consent to shed the autonomous I of the human personality is decreation. We consent to decreation in our acceptance of ourselves as no more and no less than creatures. She says, to consent to being a creature and nothing else, it's like consenting to lose one's whole existence. One still exists in exterior reality, of course, but one's I has collapsed to become one with the will of God. The infinitesimally small and uncreated part of the soul, the part where God comes to meet the human being, links both the created and decreated selves. In decreation, we're still subject to reality, to necessity, but that has all changed its meaning. So she has this beautiful image now. Go to please D. In those who love God, even in those who are perfect, the natural part of the soul is always entirely subject to mechanical necessity. But the presence of supernatural love in the soul constitutes a new factor of the mechanism and transforms it. We are like shipwrecked persons clinging to logs upon the sea and tossed in an entirely passive manner by every movement of the waves. From the height of heaven, God throws each one a rope. He who seizes the rope and does not let go, despite the pain and the fear, remains as much as the others subject to the buffeting of the waves. Only for him, these buffets combine with the tension of the cord to form a different mechanical whole. When one conceives the universe as an immense mass of blind obedience sprinkled with points of consent, one conceives also one's own being as a little mass of blind obedience with a point of consent at the center. So one consent. The consent is supernatural love. It's the Spirit of God in us. For Weil, the consent to decreation allows the human being to participate in infinite supernatural love and then serve as a vehicle for that love to pass unobstructed from God to God. God was love, and only God could truly love. They explained this process. This is E. The soul does not love a creature with created love. The love within it is divine, uncreated, for it is the love of God for God which is passing through it. God alone is capable of loving God. We can only consent to give up our own feelings so as to allow the free passage for this love. That is the meaning of denying oneself. We were created solely in order to give this consent. However, affliction itself presents the greatest threat to the voluntary free consent to decreation. For affliction possesses the capacity to rob the human being of its only true autonomy. It did not surprise Weil that affliction existed in the world, for she believes we are subject to the blind play of mechanical necessities that are indifferent to our desires and welfare. What did surprise her, however, was that, quote, God should have given affliction the power to seize the very souls of the innocent and possess them as sovereign master, end quote. For in affliction, God was, so again, absent for a time, more absent than a dead man, more absent than light in the utter darkness of a cell. What is terrible is that if in this darkness where there is nothing to love, the soul ceases to love, and God's absence becomes final. The soul has to go on loving in the void, or at least to go on wanting to love, though it may be only within an infinitesimal part of itself. Then one day God will come to show himself to the soul to reveal the beauty of the world to it, as in the case of Job. But if the soul stops loving, it falls, even in this life, into something which is almost equivalent of hell. End quote. If the soul ceased to love, or ceased wanting to love, then the infinitesimally small part of the human being that truly belonged to it, the uncreated part of the soul that was able to consent to decreation, could be extinguished. This was why Weil declared that, quote, those who plunge men into affliction before they are prepared to receive it are killers of souls, end quote. Weil scholar J.P. Little noted that, quote, decreation can take place only from inside, and the greatest crime one can commit against a fellow human being is to destroy his or her autonomy from the outside, so that he or she is no longer in a position to consent to decreation, end quote. There was no greater evil for Weil, Little wrote, than the conscious or unconscious moral destruction present in throwing others into a state of affliction. Decreation was a sacrifice of self, but it must be freely consented to, and it must not be thrust upon others, for that destroyed the possibility of their freedom. This was the power of affliction that was unknown to Weil before her year as a factory worker. When the Germans entered Paris in June 1940, Simone Weil fled with her parents to Marseille in the unoccupied zone in the south of France. While there, she worked to alleviate the suffering of the displaced and also found a farm that would take her on as a farm laborer. She wrote a great deal during this time and became friends with a Dominican priest, a Father Perrin. When she was forced to leave occupied France with her parents to set sail for New York, she came here. She thrust her essays and notebooks into the safekeeping of Father Perrin and a few other friends. Some of those writings, written during the pressures and chaos of the Second World War in Europe in 1942, are published in, maybe I left it in my backpack, in this small volume of Waiting for God. You want to see it?
I have it.
You have it?
Oh.
Yay, she's prepared. Yes, good. Kindred spirits, yes. Thank you. Waiting for God. It was the first thing I read at first. She has letters to Father Perrin in this book where she struggles over the question of Christian baptism, the love of God, her intellectual honesty, world religions, and other things. There's also in this book a remarkable essay on education, a very original essay on education, entitled Reflections on the Right Use of School Studies with a View to the Love of God. This is the essay that made me love Simone Weil. This essay is a deeply original interpretation of the purpose of education and learning, according to the cultivation of the capacity for attention, attente, for the spiritual life. In this essay, we learn what Weil means by attention and why attention is so important. Weil honors the dynamics of desire in the intellectual life. Our studies must contain pleasure and joy, she writes, for the intelligence only grows and bears fruit in joy. The joy in our studies comes from their function as a preparation for the spiritual life. People who study classical antiquity, the spiritual life is also your intellectual life, they're not necessarily separated. It's preparation for the spiritual life. For, quote, desire directed toward God is the only power capable of raising the soul. Remember, against gravity. One's talent or aptitude for a certain subject should not bear upon one's embrace of it. The subject itself is not relevant. What is relevant is the effort applied toward the mastery of the subject with the intention of developing the capacity for attention. Some of my students have a really hard time with this part. Attention is necessary for the discernment of truth and spiritual progress. With attention, we will learn to wait upon the truth. F, letter F. She uses this as an example. If we concentrate our attention on trying to solve a problem of geometry, and if at the end of an hour we are no nearer to doing so than at the beginning, we have nevertheless been making progress each minute of that hour in another more mysterious dimension. Without our knowing or feeling it, this apparently barren effort has brought more light into the soul. The result will one day be discovered in prayer. Moreover, it may very likely be felt in some department of the intelligence in no way connected with mathematics. Perhaps he who made the unsuccessful effort will one day be able to grasp the beauty of a line of Racine more vividly on account of it. But it is certain that this effort will bear its fruit in prayer. There is no doubt whatever about that. For Weil, it's necessary to desire to complete the scholarly task correctly, because without that desire, perfection is impossible. But the real accomplishment lies in the development of the disposition of attention. Another part of my training would say developing the habitus of attention. In fact, contemplating our failures by paying close attention to the origin of each fault yields great and profound results. For every time we really concentrate our attention, we destroy the evil in ourselves. I'm going to stress, I don't have this included in your poster, but she does not mean that by concentrating your attention, you're screwing your brow and you're trying really hard, because in the end when you're doing that, all you're really focused on is screwing your brow and trying really hard. But in fact, developing the capacity for the emptiness so that the knowledge can be received. So she says, and this is G, above all, attention means suspending our thought, leaving it detached, empty, and ready to be penetrated by the object. Our thought should be empty, waiting, not seeking anything, but ready to receive in its naked truth the object that is to penetrate it.
Means
Now-
if you're having writer's block, you should just like go for a walk or lie on the sofa or just stare. What does this mean?
It can mean that, and those are actually extremely helpful practices in the case of writer's block. It can actually mean that. In other words, trying. Often we're just trying and not really crafting the capacity, because what if it comes here? Instead of we're looking really hard here, what if it's coming here or up through here, and we're locked and we can't receive? So let me say more.
So it's
And
just
what
like
I
brush
think-
your teeth or something. I understand. See, sometimes when I'm writing something and I'm having a hard time with dialogue, I just get frustrated and just like, I'm gonna like brush my teeth, and somehow the words just start
That's right.
coming. Is that what you mean?
I think that's, as an artist, that would be a way to interpret this, for sure, and I would, definitely. Julia Cameron in the 1990s used to say, when you're...
Julia Cameron.
Right, totally, right? So you should say, if you're stuck, bake pies, right? And all of my artist friends from the 1990s, we recite Julia Cameron till the cows come home,
Why
because
can't
she
you
was...
like say this instead of like just making it so abstract?
Because she's a philosopher.
What can you?
I'm doing my
What can you?
best. I'm trying my
I said
best.
you.
Because I'm trying to give justice to Simone Weil. And then but when we have more
I'm
discussion,
trying
I'm
to
happy
turn
to
off.
do.
Okay.
So one of the other reasons that I believe she thinks that the capacity for attention is not just in learning and in being an artist or those things, but most importantly, if we develop our capacity for attention, we will acquire a new way of looking. This is in that same essay on school studies. And this new way of looking enables us to actually see our neighbor, love our neighbor, and recognize, and this is, I think, your last, do you have the last one on there, yes? That, and with this capacity for attention, we have an authentic way, not a pitying, patronizing way, but an authentic way of realizing and seeing that the sufferer exists, not only as a unit in a collection or a specimen from the social category labeled unfortunate, but as a man, exactly like us, who was one day stamped with the special mark by affliction. For this reason, it is enough, but it is indispensable to know how to look at him in a certain way. This way of looking is, first of all, attentive. The soul empties itself of all its own contents in order to receive into itself the being it is looking at, just as he is in all his truth. Only he who is capable of attention can do this. Simone Weil's ideas of necessity, decreation, affliction, God, truth, and beauty really culminate, I believe, in this cultivation of the spiritual capacity of attention that will allow us to see and receive the other in all their truth, or at least try. With this right understanding, and with our free consent to decreate that I, we can become open to the possibility of making room for the other, our neighbor, in truth and in reality, allowing God to love God through us. Thank you. I think we're already off to some really great discussion points, right? And I think Simone Weil would be in large agreement in wanting to make abstract thoughts have meaningful content for everyone. But of course, everyone is a large and tall order, right? Because we're all so very different. But help me help you do that. I'd be very honored to do so. Yes?
Well, we were talking in a different meeting about priests who became workers,
Yes.
and now you talk about a lady who ended up working in a factory or something.
She did.
And her own affliction was migraines.
Prior to the factory.
And
yeah.
desolate conditions of the factory.
Yes, she had terrible, she has many, many evocative writings about her own experiences, which because of time I didn't include. But she spent some time at Solem in the time of the Great Gregorian Chant Revival. And she went and spent all of Holy Week there and experienced crushing migraines. And yet she had a distinct kind of an out-of-body experience. In the midst of all of that intense pain, somehow the beauty of the chants. She reminds me of Dorothy Day in many ways, in how beauty also is woven throughout her thoughts as this very, very powerful and important part of living. And so that was part of her situation.
Now, we have the pain part of it.
Yeah.
Two branches of that. One, some people think that creativity comes out of pain, is a coping mechanism, or it's, anyway, some people think that creativity is born of pain. Second of all, when you are in a relationship, such as a doctor or a social worker, not a surgeon, but a doctor, if you have suffered yourself, this is where you get your compassion and your empathy, because you begin to see your patient or your client as a worker among workers. You can kind of empathize about what they actually are feeling or actually are going through.
Yeah, well, okay, so a couple things there. Creativity is something I'm extremely interested in, so I really thank you for bringing it up. Plato is one of the main ones who talks about the divine madness, and the suffering, and Simone Weil has this great interpretation of, is it the symposium where the wings are sprouting and they're very painful, and also that creativity is born in pain. But I would say that it's not always born in pain, but it can be. It can be. Empathy is something that I think we could all spend a lot of time thinking about, and as an educator, consciously thinking, and as a parent, how to cultivate the capacity for empathy. Certainly, having a shared experience is one way, but I'm going to also say from my artistic side, the development of one's imagination, or being an actor, placing oneself in another's shoes, and trying to interpret and make alive someone else's thoughts and feelings in your own body, also can help. There are, many strategies, I think, but two important things in our time, especially because empathy is under attack very publicly. Losers.
Yeah, and the Nazis weren't going for this either, because they were not having any empathy. They were not.
I was going to say the time at Solem, which is supposedly, I've never been to France, but has been a very beautiful monastery. And she said when she heard, you probably recall this point where when she heard the monks chanting the Gregorian chant, she felt it was at that moment that Christ, in her phraseology, Christ came down and took
And possessed her. Yeah,
of her
possessed her.
soul.
Yeah.
But the thing about Simone Weil is there's so much to her, right?
Yeah.
And what you presented tonight was so wonderful. And then there's these other parts of her that we could also gain in terms of our own understanding as trying to be workers and scholars at the Catholic Order. She indeed tried to do that.
Thank you. I think some of the ideas that I shared with you make many theological people very twitchy.
Very what?
Twitchy and uncomfortable.
Oh.
Right? There are things that she will come to in the elucidation of her thought that will sound just like what? And if not heretical, sort of just, in another dimension somehow. But I think that she's a human being, and people used to say in the world of education, there was a time when people said, oh, all this business about interdisciplinary learning, it doesn't work, and blah, 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 we all need to be in our, and I just remember arguing, but for the student who is taking all of these different kinds of classes, the student is already trying to make sense of an interdisciplinary experience. So Simone Weil is an interdisciplinary person. She clearly fell in love with the humanity, the commitment to truth, the brilliant elucidation and use of rhetoric and language of Plato. That's hands down, no question. Her first love is Plato. And then because her Greek was ridiculous, and when you know enough Greek, it's a great pleasure to go from texts of antiquity like Plato, sink yourself into the text of the New Testament or the Nag Hammadi canon or the Gospel of Thomas, whatever, take your pick, or the Apostolic Fathers, and you start seeing all of these things that cross-pollinate, then it becomes extremely rich and invigorating. So why should she not do that? She was brilliant. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. It's a wonderful presentation.
Wow.
I've let you know that Simone Weil has been studied by many. So the key thing for me is her Jewishness and her problematic understanding of her own heritage and how complicated. So she's a brilliant, and we're thankful to know something about her. Thank you so much.
Well, you bring up yet other aspects that make people extremely uncomfortable, and not without reason. Not without reason, because things like not only these things that she'll say about Christianity that hover on these margins of can we accept this or not, the fact that she wasn't baptized, although she probably was baptized on her deathbed by a friend. In the Simone Weil circles, we have people saying they know somebody who did this, but not by a priest. And certainly she was probably unconscious, and she would have been unconscious, I would think, when that happened. But she was raised in a Jewish family, a well-off Jewish family. Her father was an eminent doctor. Her brother was a brilliant mathematician. She was constantly in his shadow, but not by any way of her parents favoring one over the other. She just felt she would call her inadequacies in the face of his brilliance, which gave him more access to truth than her own faulted ways. In her mind, this is what she thought. Her mother was a very innovative thinker. They were all extremely close. And so it was a very loving family. And some people used to say, but they weren't observant Jews. Then other research has come out to say, well, actually, all the grandparents, so it was very much a part of it. But of course, we all know anti-Semitism in France at this time was huge. And also, most of her writings, in my work on her, most of the very ugly phrases that she has about the Hebrews and the Israelites are in her notebooks, which she throws into the hands of her friends when she doesn't even know she's going to make the crossing across the Atlantic. The world is blowing up. She's leaving France for New York and has no idea. She's literally like on the last boat out. Did anyone ever watch the Transatlantic series on Netflix? Did you? It's really, really actually quite good. Anyway, so never mind. But she's on one of the last ships out of Marseille. And so she doesn't have control over what she's written. And I always feel like people that want to make a lot of pronouncements about her based on the notebooks are perhaps not quite fair, because you have to have a place to work out even your worst thoughts. And so mostly I try to rely, when I have analysis like these, on things that she wrote with a beginning, a middle, and an end. But you know, the notebooks are real, and I get the impression from her, her work first emerges onto the scene in publications in the aftermath of the Holocaust. And so it is, some of those lines are tone deaf to that
Well, she
moment.
died in 43, so
She dies in
the middle of it, so she was.
She dies in the middle of it, but she would have known some of it. It would have been hard to not know, because by 43 in England, there was already some reports of the camps and things like that. That's what I originally thought too, but then I started digging in, and the information, some of it was available. When she was in occupied France, she worked very hard for the Jews that were displaced. And interestingly, in one of the biographies of her, written by her friend, the pretty definitive biography, she has at least, yeah, she has, they have copies of it, one, maybe two letters that she wrote to the authorities when the authorities demanded that she wear the yellow star because she was Jewish, and she refused. And the reasons that she gives to the authorities are, in my opinion, brilliant. The whole operation is nonsensical, right? Like, we're gonna have firing squads now back in the United States. The whole thing is nonsensical. And she points that out in her very, very amazing way. But she still refused to wear the star, which, when that fact was revealed in the climate of post-war America, especially, was unforgivable. There are things, sort of like the story of Hannah Arendt, that way she wrote about things unforgivable. So Simone Weil, I think, is in a bit of a similar trajectory. But the scathing things she writes about the Hebrews and the Israelites, if you look closely, most of them are in tandem within a series where she's also writing scathing things about the barbarian Rome and Alexander the Great and any kind of...
It was Greek.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, Macedonian maybe? Greek. Greek. Anyway,
Macedonian.
yeah, I think so.
Macedonian.
So but any kind of exclusivity was objectionable to her. She felt that if the truth was universal, it was available to all. So the idea, she reads the Hebrew Bible extremely narrowly, except for like Job, Isaiah, and the Psalms, and Genesis. But everything else is read extremely narrowly. How can there be only one chosen people? And she just doesn't like that. But this is a real problem with Simone Weil. And also, people have talked about her eating habits and how she died. That's another real problem for people. Yeah, in the back.
No, I think that, I know, I've studied Simone Weil since I was a young girl.
Wonderful.
So I don't want to hog it up. There are other people here, I'm
Okay.
sure, that want to talk, and then maybe I'll...
I do hear a lot of people saying, oh, Simone.
Oh, that's
Chosen
one didn't mean,
Say what?
as we see.
I'm sorry?
Chosen one is just, it didn't mean a favorite one, as we see what happened even to Jesus. You know what I mean?
Right, yeah. No, she reads it
Chosen
quite
one,
closely.
I'm taking a lot of suffering.
Yeah. She's not without, she should be critiqued. Absolutely, yeah. Yes.
I think with the thread you spun tonight, her thoughts sound very Ignatian. She uses different language, but like the quote letter E sounds to me like a paraphrase of Ignatius' First Principle and Foundation. And then her, which for St. Ignatius of Loyola is the principle that we are all created to love and be loved, and we should order our lives with indifference towards everything except that it gives us the ability to love and be loved. And her concentration of attention sort of sounds to me like a way of developing a spiritual freedom within yourself and an openness,
Yeah.
rather than sort of a deliberate action, but just an openness to allow other things and other movements of your soul to be noticed by you. And in H, the new way of looking, I thought sounds a lot like the idea of encounter that Pope Francis spoke a lot about.
Yeah.
That is defined a lot more by accompaniment and actually getting to know people as individuals.
Yeah.
So I think she uses very different language, but it sounds very familiar from an Ignatian perspective.
I hear those resonances also, and there's a prayer she has that's quite dramatic that I didn't have time to share, and she's taken a lot of criticism for it because people have thought it sounds masochistic and self-hating and all of these things, and I challenge my listeners after they hear the prayer, and I say, does she truly sound self-hating, full of all these repressed natural desires? I mean, remember, she's a woman, so she takes a lot of stuff, in my opinion, because she's a woman. Or is very rather grasping for the finite human language of experience to explain concretely what the existential implications of this desire might mean. Consider these two quotations from two different 16th century predecessors from St. Ignatius Loyola. Take, Lord, and receive all my liberty, my memory, my understanding, and all my will, all that I have and possess. You, Lord, have given all that to me. I now give it back to you, O Lord. All of it is yours. Dispose of it according to your will. Give me your love and your grace, for that is enough for me. And from his University of Paris compadre, John Calvin, we are not our own. Let not our reason nor our will therefore sway our plans and deeds. We are not our own. Let us therefore not set it as our goal to seek what is expedient for us according to the flesh. We are God's. No, let us therefore live for him and die for him. We are God's. Let his wisdom and will therefore rule all our actions. I'm in agreement with you. I hear those resonances.
Written the social papers.
I love it. Yes,
I surrender all.
I surrender all. Yeah.
Can you talk more about, did she ever reconcile or write beyond what you had spoken about as far as workers, as far as labor? So she has this conversation with Trotsky. At some point she sees the value in work and labor. She sees her responsibility to join the labor force, but then when she goes, she experiences alienation and affliction.
Yeah.
And does she end, I'm trying to reconcile this with like her giving up of self. Is there a way to reconcile this idea of being tied to the rope, holding onto the rope and just experiencing the waves differently than other workers? Or is there some sort of agency that workers, that people can have in bettering their environment, bettering their conditions?
Excellent question. So this is a sliver of very internal thought by Simone Weil. A person who was unbelievably active. I mean, she was everywhere. I don't know how, I don't think she slept. And certainly when she came to New York, she was not happy here. She was here for 10 months. She was living in Morningside Heights. The building's owned by Columbia now. You can see the little plaque. The attention is the greatest gift. I forget that lovely quote, of generosity, blah, blah, blah. But she hated it here. She didn't like Corpus Christi. She didn't like American Catholicism. She went to Harlem and she went to the Baptist churches in Harlem and felt that there she felt the real meaning of God. She also had she was very aware. The Maritans were also here at the same time. She appealed to Jacques to help get her back to France. He was extremely popular, and she was also quite afraid of I think it was he wrote all these books with like similar titles about natural rights and the man and human being. I can't remember the exact one. But she was alarmed by it and its use of personalism. because she felt that the language was not exact enough and not true enough on the high plane. It was too on that scholastic level of true, and she wanted it up here, and she was really afraid for the future of France because she knew how influential he was, and she wrote this brilliant essay called Human Personality, more recently translated as What is Sacred in the Human Being, which I highly recommend reading. It's brilliant. But so when she does finally get back to Europe, she gets to London, and she works feverishly. She writes some of the most luminous things out of her pen, and one of them is a political one, The Need for Roots, which has captivated in the last 10 years political science scholars. All of a sudden have been flooding the Simone Weil Society and the Simone Weil conferences. They are just, and she's got a book called On the Abolition of Political Parties. So she wrote a lot on politics. She was appalled at the conditions of workers. And even when she was working as a teacher in all these little towns, they tried to send her to the most podunk places, get her away in her with her teaching license, and she still was, at workers' meetings and rallies and all of those things. So that doesn't. It's more of a historical response more than an answer to your question. What happened after Affliction didn't change her activity, but I feel like in a way, the mechanical thing was different in her mind. She grabbed the rope. And so she's still buffeted by all the same concerns and commitments, but somehow the mechanical architecture was different. It doesn't always come through in her political writing, but it does more and more. So, yeah.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Toward the beginning of your talk, you mentioned that she kind of flips the script on this Cartesian concept, like I think, therefore I am. Do I act, therefore I am? And I'm here, I was hearing the Ignatian resonances, but also just like throughout this talk, the distinction between like her epistemology and Cartesian styles of knowing, even in the way that you described attention and her understanding of attention as this like sensitive attunement to the other, like that's the exact opposite of Descartes' understanding of knowledge, or even like the importance of empathy. And I was just wondering, like, is she wrestling with Descartes throughout her
That's
life?
a great question. I'm going to say no.
Okay.
In my mentor at Union Theological Seminary is a Jesuit named Roger Haight. He's very, very close.
He said mass with us?
I know. I knew of many times that and I mentioned you all, there was a book launch on his thought by some European scholars this last Saturday. I was moderating, and it was called Roger Haight's Theology of Conversation. And I made a pitch to say, because I did a lot of liturgical work for him, to say that his liturgical work was also, homilies of conversation, whether he was at Mary House or with Bread and Justice Community in New Jersey or at Union. Anyway, so you were all raised up in that thought with Roger. But he used to teach this class on Skillabeks, where we would study early Skillabeks who came across in a very kind of traditional sort of way, and then his thought really develops. But Roger's argument in the course of studying him was that his basic fundamental commitments never change. So I think with Simone Weil, what I have come to know is that when you go for philosophy education in France, there's a set of exams at the end of this process, and it's absolutely standardized. Everybody is reading the same small set of thinkers, and Descartes is always there because he's Descartes. And so when somebody like Simone wrestles with Descartes, she is going to draw out things about Descartes that maybe those of us here in North America would not necessarily. Her thesis was on science and perception in Descartes, and I think that the tools of those categories stayed with her throughout all of her short life. So she doesn't see him in that dualistic way in which we might categorize him amongst a palette of many other thinkers. Nietzsche was a this, Descartes was the body-mind dualist, and blah, blah, blah. She's seeing him much differently. Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think for us is, not all of us here, by the way, are Catholic or perhaps even Christian people, but, believers, but, you know, she also was very tempted, as you know, I'm sure, and others here who've read her, tempted to walk into the Catholic Church and said, they got rid of Louis IX was it Louis IX? Who was sainted during the Crusades, and yeah, she had and that if people, there was some other line about if people were not allowed, and maybe that's very misinterpreting her, to have more than X amount of money and come into the church. She felt that there was a need to speak about the vast wealth, and I'm not speaking about like the Vatican Bank, but people who were Christian, Catholic, she felt she could come into the church if she, you know, if people were not, are willing to give up their money.
Yeah, the money.
And, I don't know, I mean, and the thing is, she really, it's very interesting that she went to Meriton since he was such an Aristotelian. And she was so for Plato. Yeah, that's kind of funny.
She would never forgive Aristotle and Thomas, I think, for tolerating slavery. Aristotle said it was okay to have slaves. She was never going to forgive, and she had problems with Augustine. She had problems with a number of those folks. And of course, this is the Neo-Scholastic revival. Everybody's reading Thomas. Maritain is one of the creative interpreters of Thomas, but he was she went to him because she thought he would be able to help her get permission to get back.
I just want to say one more thing and break it open, or let's meet. I think it's important for us all to remember how tremendously acknowledged she was at that young age of dying at 34, because it was none other than Charles de Gaulle himself who asked her to be a part of the reinvigorating, you could say, of France after the war, and to work on this plan of, not only rapprochement and the need for roots was the book that came, or the writing of hers, as it was called, that came out of it. But it was de Gaulle. It wasn't just Joe Bloke down the road who took a classical, they called him Mao, you know.
Some scholars, I'm going to nuance that a bit. It was him because she was driving him nuts.
She was driving him nuts.
She had this plan, she had this idea that nurses should be parachuted into the front lines. And you know, actually, I can't remember where I read in years after that, somebody else had a plan like this in some other war and people liked it. But anyway, in this war, they didn't like this, they thought it was a nuts idea. And so, but she was insistent that it would work on the hearts and minds of people if the nurses were killed and at risk, that it would cause, or something. Anyway, but she was obsessed with this idea, and some people, I'm not so sure it's true, but some scholars have argued that de Gaulle just wanted to shut her up and said, okay, go and work for the Free France. And I think maybe he thought she was just going to serve coffee or something. But she went into a writer's delirium. She literally worked herself to death. And the need for roots came out of that, some luminous, the love of God in affliction in its entirety, which is not in Waiting for God, only a part of it is. The full one is in this book called On Science, Necessity, and the Love of God. It is so probing and so brilliant. She just, she worked herself into tuberculosis, basically, and then died. Yeah.
There's this comment, 50 million people were dying in the Second World War, 1939 to 1945.
Right.
She was living that. And
she was.
So these were not normal times, and God forbid that they should happen again. 15 million killed in the First World War, 50 million killed in the Second World War, ending with Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
She was an incredibly empathetic person, but socially awkward. And I often wonder, you know, I don't want to read diagnoses on folks, but sometimes instead of calling her a self-hating Jew or something, I sometimes wonder if it's a neurodivergence particular to women and that manifests itself in this way. But it's absolutely evident that she was in pain at the suffering of others. No question. But she also like refused to wear the appropriate kind of outfits, and some scholars like make a big deal of that. And then the fact that she wouldn't eat.
Oh no, she wanted to follow the diet of all those people
all
who were
those in
starving.
France. You know, it was part of it.
There was rationing of food.
I'm with you. I'm just telling you what's in the other
One of
books.
the things you should remember, that one of the most beautiful things she tried to teach me, it hasn't worked, is that we should never call somebody boring. And it just showed your lack of attention. You know that part where your lack of attention to hold another human being should prevent you from being so rash in your judgment or so quick with your will. Anyhow, that's
The great quote, maybe you guys that are more recently familiar with her, at Columbia, this is a beautiful one. It was in a letter she wrote to Joe Huey, I think, that was, attention is the rarest and purest form of generosity. It's a beautiful quote.
beautiful.
Okay. These are great questions.
Yeah.
Thank you.
What was the writing I want or responsibility?
Oh, yes.
What was, and who was the first writer?
Yeah, I'm like, but I don't think about me.
And I love that word being baptized.
Yeah,
It was
I'm like, that's my affliction, right?
I used to have more patience when academics just read the paper. I don't really get the appeal.
That makes so much
But really, really, I was
It's like any
not that I know. What about Mary Magdalene? Well, I was so like, I felt confident that she was so animated that she had like all this free stuff. Let me get some
highway is still.
yeah. She made it sound so like Paris Live.
I'm gonna criminal defense. You should get arrested in the Bronx. Yeah, it's the best place to do this. Because all around this.
We're old. This is what we do. Going out on Friday. It's a
That's great. That's a great reason to go. If you are thinking about law school, I would highly recommend not going to Columbia.
Well, we saw her because
There's a lot of
she was there. I was there with like
otherwise Columbia is
five
fine.
students.
There's a lot of things.
Yeah. Well, there was one.
Yeah.
A friend who went to a college in Canada. She was there too. Yeah, she's from there. Which is pretty formidable.
Well, that's usually the wrong reason we don't want to. But I went to the cheapest hospital. Yeah, it's only instant. So I used to hate her. I really did like that. And then I just was like, I that's me as a hospital.
Yeah,
I knew that
those that are up there.
either direction.
I might need to miss next Wednesday, so. Yeah, you gotta be on a Zoom as well. I was thinking like maybe like a friend, and then just get away from Zoom. Yeah, I could probably do that. Yeah, as long as like somebody can just take over. All of this stuff.
Well, Jim was right. I'm still working on getting the success story published. I have an article in the
Oh, that got acknowledged yesterday. She said the smirking.
It's a lot.
Yeah, I'm not sure if we're going to okay, but like. Yeah. I mean, like, you just take the house. Yeah. I mean, Andrew's usually there. Maybe we should just try to like,
That's the Lord's word, just because.
Any good plan?
I loved it. I love you. I read Gravity and Grace maybe just a month ago or 2 months ago. I basically threw this whole book, and I was like, wow, this is resonating and like working on me. And I feel yeah, there's a lot.
You don't have to, but is your imagination stuff figured out?
Right, it's a collection.
I'm deep just sounds so depressing. I'm ready to kind of get it outside. The silent plays are all going. Lisa
I've read it. It's very good.
So that's cool. Little light.
Yeah,
I've probably sold 1,000 copies just because of Bill.
You seem very clear about it.
Where do you know?
That's me. I'm just.
You first came for school with the drama. Yeah. That's cool. You stayed in school for 12 years.
Elections on the right.
That's impressive. I don't think I could do that.
When things go too crazy,
You know, I dropped out when I was 15. And then I took my GCE at 18. So then I go back to school when I was 28. I graduated when I was 30. Undergrad, I graduated when I was 30.
Lisa, thank you so much.
You're a Simone Weil person, I guess.
I'm old.
I'm doing it there.
That's so great.
That's great.
No. The first time I came here was 2011, but that was because I was a different Catholic worker in Denver, and I was visiting Catholics. Well, it closed down now, but it was, it operated for 23 years. Cool. Too old. You know, to me, it's hard hard. Like, people would come and then it's like, maybe they were like too tight and controlling it.
One of the questions was referencing Mary Kate's stuff.
How do you like Indian though?
It was really good. Oh, yours was so good.
Yeah.
That happens better. Yeah. No, you handled that. Like you were. There's a lot of energy being thrown at you in this space. Because Karen and I were talking about, like, it's a very like kind of chaotic, but also participatory.
That's great. I just
yeah.
So,
kind of like
my good friend Weston, speaker,
not a hermeneutic of charity, so suspicious.
he really loved it. Sorry.
I've been really excited about it.
I was so excited.
I did a library lecture like 3 times ago.
So, how do you manage to go to school for 12 weeks?
Was working.
No, but like, so, but like, you did a bachelor's in what? Where?
No, I'm dying.
Okay. And then,
Because I didn't
you don't really.
Like they are really looking across there and new. And so they kind of dismiss this like mystical side. Mystical side where you're like all these religious people are reading.
That's great.
It was all this really great.
Yeah.
Everybody
wants to domesticate these figures into their own intellectual house.
Wait, but that's 4 years. So then what do you do after that?
But, yeah. No, it was great. It was really good. You brought together a lot of us. And, you know, it was, you wove in all those quotes. Yeah. No, I thought you brought it down to earth. No, exactly. Yeah. And like, you can speak to that
That's
in a
6
way
years.
that
I can do that.
it would be really difficult for
Okay,
any of
so
us
after
to
6 years,
access through just
what?
reading. So like you provided the context now, and I think it was very invitational.
But you've been here
Like,
for
I gotta taste of this. Like I,
you did 4 years of
reminded me of
2 years of work. And then,
I'm like, I want to assign that. I want to put that on my syllabus, like week 1 or week 2.
Before that, I was
How are you?
good. You know, just go and make sure you miss the entire meeting.
oh, in Louisiana.
Well, it was an excellent meeting.
So,
Little bits, and I'm like,
are your parents here? No.
Another hermeneutic of suspicion emerging here. Yeah. Anyway, you missed an amazing talk by an amazing person.
Your parents? The school.
Yeah, catch up.
So,
that
what-
was legit.
what's your parents' name?
Look at that. Wait, is that? Did you actually get that at it? Oh, wow. That's so cool. I like it. Oh, here's
It took me exactly 12 years to learn the math before I became Catholic.
they're in Ireland. That's their.
I'm not trying to make it.
So it's like a historical theology at Fordham, which is where we became friends. and her master's in systematic theology with Roger Hay at Union Theological
Blessed memory.
in New York. Lisa is also a musician and music educator. She has served on the music faculties of Long Island University, Nyack College, the Diller Quayle School of Music, and others.
And many others.
Many others. She is currently the co-founder and co-director of the Community Voices Choir, a creative aging initiative at Lincoln Center.
Nice.
So let's welcome Lisa.
Thank you very much for your warm welcome. It's a pleasure to be here. It's really an honor to be here. And I say this specifically this current semester because I've had the privilege of teaching history of the Catholic worker to my students in my religion and social justice course, of which one of my students, Taha, is here from Manhattan University, excuse me. And I'm gazing back, I think, is that Mother Cabrini I see looking at me from back there? We had a marvelous visit to her shrine as part of our coursework this semester, and that was really great. I feel a little bit small. Should I sit on the table?
You're welcome.
Would that be maybe, or yes?
Sure, you can.
Is it
Yeah, you
easier?
can. Yeah.
Is it able to support me? It
Did
was-
everybody get one of those? Yeah.
It will definitely hold your weight. Don't worry about that.
Joanne, are you
I'm
for?
a little- If you want to hold on to this, Jim. This might- Yes.
Yeah.
That's easier, right? I can see you all.
Yeah.
You can tell once, you can take the gal out of showbiz, but you can't take the showbiz out of the gal. And it's fun to be here. One of my other students, I had chosen to do the Dorothy Day Pilgrimage Walk just in the last couple of weeks, and had written in their reflection paper that Dorothy was so happy to move into this space because it was a former music school, and was so pleased, I learned all this from my student, as one does, and was so pleased that the residence rooms were former practice rooms because the walls were filled with music. So that was a really interesting bit of historical knowledge I didn't know, but was very pleasing to me as I made my way down here. But tonight I'm going to talk to you about Paris. Paris in the 20th century. First I want to ask, can you all hear me in the back? Okay, great. Thank you. We're going to talk about Paris in the 20th century and about a particular figure, Simone Weil, who has been a very close intellectual and spiritual companion for me since I first discovered her writings 20 years ago, I guess. So we will be partly historical, partly philosophical and theological, and I'll be sharing with you some moments of her writing, of which you have some excerpts on the paper there, because I really find it difficult to talk about Simone Weil without giving folks a taste of the flavor and cadence and poetry of her own thought. So here we go. And the object of all of this is to try to tie together different themes that all will build upon one another to help us understand what I meant when I said the title of this talk would be Simone Weil and Making Room for the Other. And I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts after we go through this somewhat labyrinthine journey. Paris in the years between the two world wars of the 20th century was a tumultuous mix of intransigent, patriotic, anti-democratic reactionaries on one extreme, and liberal, secular, even anti-Christian, and certainly anti-clerical Republicans on the other, as well as a proliferation of, quote, third way options, trying to forge a path through a highly politicized and polarized climate. France in the interwar period, from the jazz age of the 20s to the increasing international hostilities of the 1930s, was a nation beset with contested values, rising xenophobia and anti-Semitism, economic depression and even collapse, multiple truth claims clamoring for allegiance, and a proliferation of propaganda found not only in the media of the time, pamphlets and speeches, but also leaching into the highest forms of arts and culture. Sound a little familiar? Yeah. 20th century French philosopher Simone Weil, was born in 1909 and died in 1943 at 34 years of age. She was not insensitive to the pressures of her time, nor to the suffering she witnessed around her. She pushed her philosophy and her life against the political, social, and economic forces that pressed against her and brought so much suffering. At the same time, she explored the unquenchable human desire for God, expressed in a longing to merge her human will with the will of the infinite divine. Highlights of her life story are well known: her brilliant intellect, social activism, her nickname of the Red Virgin, although she never joined the Communist Party, her self-elected employment as a factory worker, her attempt to fight Franco in the Spanish Civil War, tenure as a farm laborer in occupied France, her migraines, her mystical experiences, peculiar eating and non-eating habits, and so it goes on and on. Her spiritual embrace of Christianity, which stopped just shy of official baptism, leaving her waiting, and hypomene, as she put it in her beloved Greek, on the steps of the church she adored. Weil writes in an aphoristic, provocative, really kind of amazing style. Because her writing is so distinctive, in the handout are a few of her passages that will be a part of my presentation. So when I come to those moments, I'll call out the bold-faced letter, and you can locate yourself on the handout if you want to read along. I'm going to speak this evening on a few key themes present in Weil's thought: truth, attention, necessity, decreation, creation, affliction, God, and what it means to truly see and receive our neighbor, which involves, for Weil, the decreating of ourselves to make room for the other. Discerning the truth with a capital T is no small matter. Part of the difficulty, Weil believes, is that we do not realize that truth exists on a different plane than that of our ordinary world. For Weil, truth is an absolute. It's a good of a supernatural order. It's eternal. It's light. Yet this light breaks through to meet us here in created reality, and in so doing changes us, changes our world, changes our perception, and gives us contact with truth, with real reality in this world of necessity and objects. Truth for Weil is the light, the supernatural light, illuminating the world of necessity, giving us direct contact with a piece of reality. Now I'm going to tell you that Weil believes we are liars. We lie to each other and we lie to ourselves. We spend the minutes, hours, and days of our lives occupied with tasks and pursuits that are shrouded in dreams, dreams that mist over our true limits and mask that edge of authentic contact with reality. Like the beings in the allegory of the cave, written by her beloved Plato, we exist interacting with shadows that we believe are real. Our entire frame of reference is distorted. We are subject to this distortion and deceive and content ourselves with the acceptance that this distortion is reality. In our subjection to Plato's cave, which Weil insists is not in our civilizational past, but is ongoing and right now, we are incapable of any true thought or act. Quote, we are offered nothing but lies, end quote. We convince ourselves that the good we possess in our family, in friends, wealth, power, and love are the value of our existence and the means of satisfying our desires, and that with just a little bit more of them, we will know fulfillment and truth. But our desires are never fully satisfied. We delude ourselves into thinking the future will provide us with an all-sufficient good, when the future, in fact, is made of no different stuff than the present. If we're honest with ourselves, we will, quote, realize that there is nothing in this world to live for. We have only to imagine all our desires satisfied. After a time, we should be discontented. We should want something else, and we should be miserable through not knowing what to want, end quote. To be honest with ourselves, however, we do have to know ourselves. And even this we cannot do, for in the cave all we see is our own shadow. The Delphic know thyself is not possible nor practicable in the cave. What is necessary, Weil believes, is that we develop our capacity for attention. To do this, one both exerts an effort of will and also disposes of the will in order to empty, wait, and allow. In actuality, the human will gets distilled into one minuscule exercise of freedom, the freedom to consent to decreate. So before describing this consent to decreate in more detail, I'm going to back up and set up a little bit of how Weil gets to this idea. It's important that in understanding a thinker like Weil, especially someone like her, because she integrated her philosophy and action in her life so fully. Weil's graduating thesis at the École Normale in 1930 framed the famous cogito of Descartes, I think, therefore I am, into her own. I can act, therefore I am. She wrote, quote, to exist, to think, to know are only aspects of a single reality to be able to act. What I am is defined by what I can do, end quote. She put her thesis to test following her graduation. She grew more involved with the workers' movement, with teachers, miners, and factory workers. At the same time, the rise of nationalism and fascism in Italy and Germany, with strong echoes in France, agonized her. Moreover, the great suffering of Russia under communist rule was becoming impossible to deny. At one point, I think in 1933, she hosted Trotsky in her family apartment. They got into a big argument. She told him Russia was no longer a worker state. Trotsky said that it was, and the fight went on into the early hours of the morning. She was now convinced that collectivities, groups, could not provide the kinds of deep answers called for by the suffering endured in 20th century Europe. So by 1933, her philosophical and social thought had reached an impasse. Increasingly disillusioned by the current political and social climate, she hoped that actual contact with the life of the worker would provide her with answers that the other methods had not. She took a sabbatical from her teaching duties in 1934, and she entered the workforce voluntarily as a factory piece worker, as in P-I-E-C-E, on the assembly line, not working for, give peace a chance, but piece worker. She was physically unsuited for the demanding work. She suffered from recurring migraine headaches, and sadly found little camaraderie among her fellow laborers. Yet, this radical move to work in the factory brought Weil into face-to-face contact with an important reality, one that she would name le malheur, or affliction. In a letter to a friend in 1935, she described her experience of affliction during her factory year. This is not on your handout, so just bear with me. It's a long quote. What working in a factory meant for me personally was as follows. It meant that all the external reasons, which I had previously thought internal, upon which my sense of personal dignity, my self-respect was based, were radically destroyed within 2 or 3 weeks by the daily experience of brutal constraint. And don't imagine that this provoked in me any rebellious reaction. No, on the contrary, it produced the last thing I expected from myself, docility. The resigned docility of a beast of burden. Slowly and painfully, in and through slavery, I reconquered my sense of my human dignity, a sense which relied, this time, upon nothing outside myself, and was accompanied always by the knowledge that I possessed no right to anything, and that any moment free from humiliation and suffering should be accepted as a favor, as merely a lucky chance, end quote. This experience in the factory so marked and changed Weil that she realized her earlier understandings of human personality and will, what she felt could be shaped by the rational activity of the human mind, which is very French, in the midst of blind natural and social forces, these understandings were inadequate. She had not realized that those blind natural and social forces had the potential for utterly destroying the human soul. After 1 year in the factory, she was physically, emotionally, spiritually, and psychologically battered. And she could not imagine how someone who did not have the opportunity to leave the factory, as she did, nor her education and strength of will, might hold on to their soul. She realized it was quite possible that the human soul could be annihilated. Affliction, Weil says, is not like simple suffering, but it's a specific and irreducible kind of suffering. Affliction appropriates the soul and brands it with slavery. It is always physical suffering, but not only this. Merely physical suffering can be forgotten the moment it's over, like a toothache. But affliction is different. Affliction attacks life in its entirety, physically,